Hi there, it's me. How are you? It is Tuesday and it's 2 o'clock, and that means I am going to be breaking down what happened on Sunday and giving an update about what's going to happen for the rest of this week. And so I'm going to make this sweet, but maybe not short. Last time it was short and it wasn't sweet. So I'm going to do my best to make it sweet. And I'm actually pre-recording this, even though I'm going to give it a live feel, because there's something weird with my camera connecting to YouTube. And anyway, like you care. Anyway, so I'm Jeff, and here we go. Last Sunday, actually, let's go back, last Saturday, our Easter egg hunt that I was promoting here very many times was awesome. We had hundreds of people coming through the church. We had a great presentation at the beginning that our children's ministry put on, and then the different sections around the building and outside where the eggs were. They weren't really hidden. It was more frenzy of children grabbing eggs that were out in the open, which I thought was kind of fun. And oh man, there was some for smaller kids, there was regions for bigger kids. It could not have gone better. Pastor James and Bethany and Mary and all the volunteers just did an amazing job. Games in the fellowship hall, a lot of our teens were helping with that, working the tables and the little games, and everyone who volunteered. The safety team was great. People were just there to kind of hang out and meet people, and the people who made the hot dogs. I mean, I watched it and I thought, there are so many component parts that, because I've been around long enough, I know the history of getting a healthy and effective safety team running, seeing our youth be involved, seeing the intergenerational stuff that was happening there, the open-heartedness to the community. Man, it was just so... I was proud. I was just crazy proud of all of the people here and all of you who participated in that. And I was also super thankful just to see what the Lord's been doing here at the church. It was a massive win, and it was just a great time. And if you were here, you already know that, because it was great. We did get some cool drone footage that be kind of fun to show off as kind of a celebration of that day and what God did here. And then the very next day, which was Palm Sunday, a couple days ago, we had a wonderful time with the joint service. It's weird. What we try to do with these is we want the 3 worship services we have every Sunday to feel like we're one church. Well, the challenge is, because Grace Latino's normal service time is the 10:30 hour, not the 9 o'clock hour, to invite them to come to the sanctuary means they're all there at 10:30, not at 9 o'clock. But I don't want to plan 2 different services for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is, I think even the people who come at 9 o'clock should experience some bilingual worship, because that's who we are as a church, even if there aren't a ton of Grace Latino people there. So we planned the service. The only difference between the 2 is, well, we have the baptistry ready for anyone for either service, but we tend to have the baptisms at the 10:30 service more than the 9 o'clock. And this last week we didn't have any at the 9 o'clock. But the other main difference is Eileen did not translate me into Spanish during the 9 o'clock service. But during 10 o'clock, she translated both directions, as she always does, because she's awesome. And I think everybody understands that by now. But if you still get a chance to tell her that she's awesome, I'm sure she'd love to hear it. And so that means that the first hour we got done early, because I had prepared, X number of minutes of preaching, and to not have it translated, we just kind of finished early, and we didn't have the baptisms as well that we did at second service. Second service, we finished 15 minutes late. And that's kind of the way it goes with these. And part of what Ali would tell me is, Latino time, you start late, you end late. It's just the way it goes. And so it was fun. It was a blast. Ali and I, just again, the purpose of these breakdowns, show you a little behind the curtain. Sometimes when we've done these joint services, we've worked hard over the same desk, over the same passage. You're going to say this, I'm going to say that. Here's how the outline will work. Other times, it's, okay, you write your sermon, and I'll write my sermon. We'll compare notes, and then we'll merge them together. This time, we knew we wanted to do straight through the front door Palm Sunday story. He even mentioned it. He's like, he asked me, are we going to do the donkey again? Are we just going to do that, or are we going to try and come around from a different angle, and I just said, you know what? There's a reason why it's on the church calendar. There's a reason why we celebrate it. Let's talk about the donkey again. And of course, it's not about the donkey, which was a really good point he made. It's about the humility of our King, and therefore the humility that we need to carry with us. And he really wanted to hit that point. I thought that's awesome. And I looked at the passage in John, and I saw the Zechariah 9 quote. And so I just went back and reread Zechariah 9, and I'm like, if I were writing a sermon just for me to deliver, I would do Zechariah 9, 9, 10, and 11. Boom, here's what the Messiah will do, here's who he is. And so I brought that to Ali. I'm like, what do you think of this? Do you think it'll fit with what you want to do? He said, yes, you start with that. Talk about the humility of the Messiah and why people missed it, even though it's clearly there in Zechariah. And he said, then I'll take it to the humility of us. And it sounded great. And something always happens when you're sharing a sermon, which is such a unique thing. Not often is a pastor asked to do that, and we do it at least 4 times a year. And we're getting better at it, and we're getting used to it. But as always seems to happen, during the first service, things that I thought I were going to connect, things that I had planned to say that I thought we were going to connect with what Ali was going to say, they didn't really connect. I mean, a couple times I even said first service, well, this leads to that, but Ali's going to tell you about that in a second. And then this leads, but Ali's going to bring that up. And then he didn't. And it wasn't his fault. I just hadn't heard what he was going to say. And so I made some assumptions that they were wrong. But I got to hear what he said, and then he got to hear what I said. And then the goal was I finish the time in trying to kind of tie up any loose ends that were left. And we had planned that. But what ended up happening, of course, is the second time through at the 10:30 service, there were hardly any loose ends because we knew now what the other one was going to do and where they're going to go. And as much as we don't want either service, we want them to be as symmetrical as possible. I don't want anybody to ever feel like I think of the first service as a trial run or a warm-up, because it isn't. We're bringing our A game as much as we can every time. I also don't want people at the second service to feel like, oh, I spent all my mental energy and this is just kind of the downhill slope, or I'm running out of energy, or whatever it is. I try to bring my A game both services. But when we're doing this combined idea in preaching, boy, it seems to get better subsequent times. But I talked to some people who were at the 9 o'clock service, and I don't know how weird it is to be doing Spanish stuff when there's not people, native Spanish speakers, at least not nearly as many as there were at 10:30. But again, I don't really care. I like that we're putting that in front of all the people the same way, because that's who we are. And I think it's good for all of us to grow in those areas. It's also the same reason why we don't do a traditional service and a contemporary service, because that's such a cop-out to me. I understand why it's good and why other churches have done it. I just feel like it's subsidizing people's immaturity to say, no, you don't have to grow past your own musical preferences. We'll just feed you what you want. And I have to answer to Jesus for that kind of decision someday. And I don't want to say, yeah, I decided not to disciple them in their way of unifying the church across musical tastes. Instead, I just let them separate over that. Like, that bothers me to the core. So similarly, the fact that God has been blessing our church with Grace Latino, and we are finally, I think, representing our city, which is 30% Latino, in who's a part of our church. And so I love the idea that we're all just going to sing in Spanish for a little bit. Well, I don't feel comfortable. That feels tough. Welcome to the kingdom of God. They have to deal with English speakers all the time. So I like that we get to honor, mutual honor society across the cultures is so cool. And so yeah, those are my 2 cents about that. Coming up this week, Friday is Good Friday. Pastor John is going to be doing the message, and I'll be leading the music. And it's always a great kind of time of somber reflection on the cross, doing our business with the Lord in reflecting on his death. We'll have communion. And then obviously Easter Sunday. One of the things that always happens in churches, the question every pastor has to deal with on Christmas and Easter, do we do something crazy or do we do something normal? Do you do a big cantata? Do you do, like at Christmas time, are you going to bust out the orchestra and the choir? Are you going to do, are you going to do live animals in the service for Christmas? Make it a huge special deal. Easter, are we going to have all these extra elements of special music and decorations? And my philosophy has always been the same. I don't want to bait and switch the visitors. If this is the only time we get them here, let's give them us. Let's do what we do as good as we can do it. And that way, if they come back the next Sunday, it doesn't feel like a completely different church. It's kind of what they got the week before. But this time, obviously, it's going to be pretty focused on the empty tomb, which that's what Easter's for. And so some years I do like an apologetic sermon on Easter because I'm assuming a lot of visitors coming through. Some weeks or some years I try to come at the Easter story through like one of Peter's sermons in Acts or something Jesus says in Revelation that ties back to the resurrection. And there's so many ways. If you're going to talk about the resurrected Christ, it's all over the New Testament. So you can't really go wrong. But then some years it's like, you know what? Let's just read the gospel accounts of the resurrection of Christ. And let's just talk about that for a while. And I think that's what we're going to do this year. Again, I don't want to try and out-clever the greatest story ever told. Just tell the story. Jesus rose from the dead. It really happened? What does that mean? What does that mean for us? Have we thought about it lately? That's kind of where we're headed this week. And it'll kind of just be a party on Sunday. So you won't want to miss that. We've been getting some feedback a little bit about our business meeting time change possibility here at the end of April. That conversation's still happening. So if you have a preference, if you have a reason not to move it to right after the second service, please let us know, because this is a decision we want to make as publicly as possible. We don't want anybody to be like worried that we're just moving things around willy-nilly. It was a good idea from our children's folks, and honestly, for me, just personally, I tend to be worthless on Sunday nights because I'm crashing pretty hard. I'm in a routine. I don't know how many of you know this. Pretty much Monday is my Sabbath. And I used to be constantly checking email and texts, and I was available. And I was just getting more and more frustrated. And I talked to my friend Alan Kraft, who's a pastor of the Free Church in Greeley, which, it's a pretty big church. And I know him, and I know his family, and we've been friends for a long time. And I was having coffee with him one time, and I just said, Alan, how do you do it where you actually disengage? Like, how do you manage all of this without just getting overwhelmed? And he said, well, you need a Sabbath like everybody else does. I said, yeah, but, business still happens on Monday. People are reaching out. And he's like, yeah, but you don't have to listen. You can be off the grid for a day. And I said, well, it's easy for you to say. And then I realized, well, no, it would be harder for him to say that. So I said, how did you make those adjustments? And it was great. He leaned across the table at me and he said, Jeff, when you decide you love your wife enough, let me know. What do you say to that? Well, he was right. The family needs to get good Jeff, not just exhausted Jeff, and not distracted Jeff. And being a pastor's kid, my dad always managed it really well, but it was kind of the expectation that, it's a Wednesday night, you're not going to see dad. So all that is background to this. When I leave here on a Sunday afternoon, say 1 o'clock, that's the beginning of my weekend. And when I get here at like 8:30 on Tuesdays, then I'm back in work mode. And so if you try to get a hold of me on a Sunday night, if you try to text me about a church business thing on Monday, I ain't going to see it. Or if I see it, I ain't not going to respond. Because I love my wife enough. And those kind of boundaries, I think, I don't apologize for. I think I want to model that for people. And all that to say, I've been in this rhythm now for a number of years, maybe even 20 years I've been doing this, even since I talked with Alan more exclusively, doing this for maybe 5 or 7 years. And to come back at 6:30 on a Sunday night to do church business, I am just not wired for that. And so sometimes I'm hyper anxious about how the meeting's going to go. Sometimes I take too much control. Sometimes I don't speak up enough. But I'm never, maybe, can I say that? Yeah. I don't know if I've ever been comfortable at a business meeting. And it has nothing to do with the people, has nothing to do with the debates. It has nothing to do with what may or may not be said. because our church is great, and some of those questions need to be asked, and some of those things need to be said, and some don't, and then, like, that's fine. I basically am trying to pastor in those moments with no gas in the tank at all. And so personally, the idea of moving it to, while I still have adrenaline in my brain, while things are still kind of church mode for me, so much more preferable, just from my perspective. At the same time, it's a pretty big change for a 60-year-old church to just move the time of one of the 2 big meetings that we have annually. So that's why I prefer it, and that's kind of why we've made the pitch a little bit. But also the children's ministry and the Awana families and a lot of those things, it's just, to me, it makes so much more sense to do it after the second service. So that's the plan, but it is not a top-down decision. It's an idea. Let us know what you think. Because at some point we do have to make a decision to start promoting and printing things. So let us know what you think. Thanks for listening to what I think. And I think that's what I think. And I think that's all I think for the purposes of this video. So thanks for making Palm Sunday awesome. I think Good Friday and Easter are also going to be awesome.